Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that sometimes humiliation can be a turning point, if not for redemption, then for revelation. Thomas Dupree had spent most of his adult life constructing a facade of composure, the calm strategist, the man with the plan, the guy who never tripped over his own shoelaces, let alone his own ego. But that illusion began to crumble the night everything went wrong with Kat. He hadn't expected to see her again after that disastrous evening with Eva, a night fueled by anger, confusion, and the false comfort of attention. Kat had walked out the next morning, her silence louder than any argument. Thomas thought that was at the end of something that had already been limping along for months. He told himself he didn't deserve forgiveness, and maybe he didn't. But time, as it tends to do, stretched things out and blurred the edges. By the time February rolled around, and Beyond the Gates' twisted world began bleeding into their reality, Thomas found himself standing outside Kat's apartment again. The reunion wasn't cinematic. There was no music, no dramatic embrace. Just two people sitting across from each other, awkwardly nursing cold coffee while the ghosts of their mistakes hovered in the room. Kat had changed, not in the way people claim when they want to sound poetic, but literally. She'd cut her hair short, stopped wearing the pale lipstick Thomas used to love. She looked older, sharper, a little colder. Yet when she smiled tentatively, like testing a bruise, Thomas saw a glimpse of the warmth that once made him believe in them. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "everyone keeps telling me you're a mistake I should have learned from." Thomas smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "They're not wrong. I didn't say I agreed with them." That was Kat, contradiction wrapped in calm. She was both angry and forgiving, both distant and drawn to the same trouble she swore she'd outgrown. Against her friend's advice, she let Thomas back in cautiously at first, as though he were a recovering storm she couldn't resist standing under. They began spending evenings together again. Dinner, music, long conversations that felt like rewinding a movie and noticing different things each time. Kat kept her guard up, but Thomas could tell she was trying. And he tried, too, perhaps harder than he ever had before. He wanted to make things right. But the past doesn't vanish just because you refuse to look at it. It lingers, it leaks. And one night, it slipped through the cracks. They met at the same hotel where things had once gone so terribly wrong. A foolish idea, but Thomas insisted. "Let's start where we broke," he said, meaning it metaphorically. Kat agreed, meaning it literally. The place hadn't changed much, the same patterned carpet, the same muted hallway light. Thomas couldn't help feeling the weight of memory pressing on his chest. The last time they were there, she'd left him in tears, not out of cruelty, but disappointment. He'd been defensive, careless, and she'd called him out in front of strangers. That humiliation had stayed with him like a stain he couldn't wash off. This time, though, Kat promised things would be different. "I won't make you feel small again," she said, and for a brief moment, Thomas believed her. The night started well enough. Laughter, teasing, a fragile sense of comfort rediscovered. They danced to music too loud for the small room, moving with that reckless joy that comes when you forget the world is watching. But somewhere between laughter and emotion, something went wrong. A moment of awkward misjudgment that turned into pain, literal and sharp. Thomas gasped, stumbled, and the next thing he knew, he was clutching his side, his face contorted in disbelief. Kat froze, realizing she might have actually hurt him. "What happened?" she stammered, but Thomas couldn't even form words. The night devolved into chaos. Within an hour, they were in the emergency room. Thomas wrapped awkwardly in a blanket, half in pain, half in shock, and fully humiliated. The fluorescent lights didn't help. Neither did the nurse's barely suppressed grin when she asked, "So, how did this happen again?" Kat wanted to disappear. She tried to explain, but the more she spoke, the worse it sounded. "It was an accident. We were just—" She stopped herself. "Dancing." The nurse arched a brow. "Must have been quite a dance." That was when Shanice arrived. Kat had called her in desperation a bad idea. As it turned out, Shanice was the kind of friend who meant well but couldn't resist turning awkward moments into running jokes. She took one look at Thomas, sitting on the hospital bed with an ice pack and a mortified expression, and burst into laughter. "Oh no," she said between giggles, "not a Dupree emergency again." "What did you do this time?" Thomas groaned, pulling the blanket over his face. "I didn't do anything," he muttered, but Shanice was already shaking her head. Kat tried to stay calm, though her cheeks burned. "He's fine," she insisted, then immediately turned to Tomas with worry. "You are fine, right?" He glared at her. "Do I look fine?" That only made Shanice laugh harder. The hospital staff couldn't take it seriously either. Somewhere between the X-ray and the doctor's nervous cough, Tomas realized this story was going to live forever in whispers and inside jokes. Kat, mortified but trying to be supportive, sat by his bed, holding his hand. "I swear, Tomas, I didn't mean." "Yeah," he said flatly. "I know." But he wasn't sure he did. The irony was unbearable. After all his attempts to repair their relationship, this was how it unraveled under the unflattering glow of hospital lights, with laughter echoing in the background. Tomas could feel his pride crumbling. Kat blamed herself endlessly. She apologized again and again, sending texts long after they'd left the hospital. "You have to believe me. I didn't mean to hurt you. It was supposed to be fun. I thought we were okay." He didn't reply for 2 days. When he finally did, the message was short. "Yeah, we were okay." The unspoken until we weren't hung heavy between them. But guilt is a strange magnet. Instead of driving them apart, it pulled them back together. Kat showed up at his apartment a week later, holding a small paper bag of pastries, an apology disguised as breakfast. "I can't stop thinking about that night," she said quietly. "Neither can I," Tomas replied, dryly. "Every time I sit down, I'm reminded." She winced but smiled anyway. "You're still making jokes." "That's a good sign," he sighed. "Or a bad one." Something in that exchange softened them both. They sat on the couch, not touching, not talking, until the silence turned into understanding. Kat confessed she'd been terrified not just of hurting him physically, but of ruining the fragile peace they were rebuilding. "I thought if I could make you laugh again," she said, "maybe we could forget everything else." Tomas looked at her, really looked. Beneath the guilt, there was tenderness. "You don't have to fix things by breaking me," he said quietly. They laughed, then the kind of laugh that hides exhaustion, fear, and relief all at once. In the following days, the story spread among their circle. Shanice, of course, couldn't keep it quiet. "Poor Tomas," she told everyone. "Taken down by passion or plumbing, depending on how you look at it." Tomas pretended not to care, but every time someone smirked his way, his stomach twisted. The humiliation clung to him like a stubborn shadow, and yet, part of him found the absurdity almost comforting. There was something freeing about being the butt of the joke. It left him with nothing left to defend. Kat, on the other hand, couldn't laugh it off. She grew more withdrawn, avoiding calls, skipping gatherings. When Tomas asked why, she said softly, "Because everyone's laughing at you, but I feel like they're laughing at me too." It was true. For all her bravado, Kat was fragile where it mattered. She'd wanted to be strong, the woman who forgave, who rebuilt, but she'd become the punchline of her own attempt at redemption. One night, after too many sleepless hours, she showed up at Tomas's door again. "I can't let that be our story," she said. "Not the hospital, not the jokes." He hesitated, torn between exhaustion and the old ache of wanting her. "Then what do you want it to be?" "I want to start over," she said. "For real this time. No pretending, no proving. Just us." Tomas studied her face, the sincerity, the guilt, the hope. Maybe she meant it. Maybe he wanted to believe she did. He let her in. They talked until dawn about fear, about failure, about the strange way love survives even after it breaks you. Kat admitted she'd ignored her friend's warnings because, despite everything, Tomas felt like home, messy, unpredictable, but familiar. And Tomas confessed that the humiliation hadn't just been about pain or laughter. It was about feeling powerless, like every version of himself he'd tried to protect had been stripped away under those hospital lights. By sunrise, they weren't fixed, but they were honest. And that was something. Still, Tomas couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was unfolding beneath the surface. The whole ordeal, the injury, the hospital, the whispered jokes had cracked open a part of him he didn't know how to close again. He began to withdraw, his humor fading. He stopped answering Shanice's messages, stopped showing up to social gatherings. Kat noticed the shift and grew anxious. "Tomas," she said one evening, Are you sure you're okay? He smiled faintly. I've been better. She reached for his hand. You can't tell me anything. I'm just tired of being a story, he said. I want to be real again. The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning. Kat squeezed his hand, unsure how to respond. Two people sat in the quiet aftermath of chaos, trying to remember what it meant to love without fear. Kat woke up one morning to find Thomas gone. His phone was still on the nightstand, buzzing every few minutes with missed calls from the hospital, a follow-up appointment he had been avoiding for days. She sat there, staring at the empty side of the bed, feeling that familiar cold panic creeping in. He hadn't left a note, just silence. By noon, Shanice called. He came by the cafe, she said. Looked like he hadn't slept. Ordered black coffee? Didn't say a word. You two fight again? Kat hesitated. Not exactly. He's just not himself lately. That's an understatement. He looked like a ghost. Kat sighed. He's ashamed. He thinks everyone's laughing. Well, everyone was laughing, Shanice said, then softened. But not in a mean way. It was just one of those stories people can't believe actually happened. He should be proud he survived it. Kat didn't respond. Pride wasn't what Thomas was feeling. That evening, she found him at the park, sitting alone by the fountain, watching the water spill over the edge in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. You skipped your checkup, she said, quietly. He didn't look at her. I didn't need to go. You do. It's healing. But it's fine. His voice was sharper than intended. Then, after a pause, he added, I can't keep walking into that hospital. Every nurse there knows my name now. Kat sat beside him. You can't let embarrassment dictate your life. Thomas smiled bitterly. That's easy for you to say. You didn't have to explain to a surgeon that your injury was caused by dancing too hard. She wanted to laugh, but the look on his face stopped her. You know, he continued, staring at the water, when we first met, you said I never take risks. You said I live like a man afraid to make mistakes. Maybe I should have stayed that way. That's not fair, Kat whispered. Isn't it? They sat in silence, the fountain murmuring between them. It was then that Kat realized something crucial. The hospital incident wasn't just a funny story to Thomas. It had reopened every insecurity he'd buried, the fear of being ridiculous, of being weak, of losing control. The incident wasn't the wound, it was the mirror. He didn't need sympathy. He needed to reclaim his dignity. Over the next week, Kat made it her mission to help him do that. She convinced him to go out again, to face people, to laugh about it not as a joke at his expense, but as a shared absurdity. Their first public test came at Shanice's housewarming party. Thomas almost turned around at the door. He could already hear the laughter and clinking glasses, the chatter that made his stomach tighten. But Kat squeezed his hand and said, You've got this. Inside, the crowd noticed him instantly. A few grins, a few murmurs. Then Shanice, with impeccable timing, raised a glass. To my favorite couple, she announced, who proved that passion can be dangerous and occasionally requires medical supervision. Laughter erupted. Thomas froze for a second, his instinct to shrink kicking in, but then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Hey, he said loudly, at least now I've got a hospital loyalty card. The crowd roared. Shanice beamed. Kat exhaled, relief washing over her. For the first time in weeks, Thomas felt control return to him. Humor, the very thing that had once deepened his humiliation, became his weapon again. He used it to reclaim the narrative, to turn shame into story. After the party, they walked home in the cool night air, hand in hand. Kat looked up at him, smiling. You were amazing in there. I just got tired of hiding, he said. If they're going to laugh, I might as well laugh too. That's the spirit. For a moment, it felt like balance was restored. But peace, as they'd learned, never lasted long for them. In the following days, Thomas's physical recovery didn't match his emotional one. He began to experience sharp pains again, sudden and inexplicable. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong. Stress, they said. Overexertion. Anxiety. He didn't tell Kat right away. He didn't want her to blame herself again. But Kat could sense something was wrong. His sleep was restless, his smiles thinner. Talk to me, she urged one night. You're scaring me, Thomas. He rubbed his temples. It's nothing. Just nerves. Don't do that, she said. Don't shut me out again. He looked at her, really looked, and for a second, She saw the same quiet fear that had haunted him at the hospital. "It's not you," he said softly. "It's me not knowing how to move past it. I keep replaying everything, every laugh, every look. I know it's stupid." Kat didn't know what to say. "There are no quick fixes for shame. It's not something you talk out of existence." She wrapped her arms around him instead, holding him as if that could anchor him back to the present. Over the next few weeks, Thomas began seeing a therapist reluctantly, at first, then with growing openness. He learned to trace the threads of his anxiety back to childhood, a father who mocked failure, a lifetime of avoiding vulnerability. The hospital incident had merely stripped away the armor he'd built around those old wounds. Kat supported him, attending some sessions, listening, learning. In those quiet therapy rooms, they began to understand each other on a deeper level, not just as lovers, but as two flawed people trying to forgive themselves. But Shanice, ever the observer, wasn't convinced the calm would last. One afternoon, she pulled Kat aside. "You're being the hero again," she said. "Trying to fix what isn't yours to fix." "He's getting better," Kat insisted. "Maybe. But are you?" The question hit harder than expected. Kat had been so focused on Thomas's recovery that she hadn't looked at her own reflection in weeks. The guilt still clung to her, not just for the accident, but for the deeper truth beneath it. That part of her had enjoyed being the one in control for once. That realization unsettled her. It wasn't cruelty, but a craving for power, the opposite of how she'd felt when Thomas betrayed her with Eva. She hadn't meant to hurt him, but on some subconscious level, she'd wanted to feel stronger. It was a revelation she couldn't share with anyone, not even Thomas. So she carried it quietly, smiling through the cracks, pretending her forgiveness came without strings. Months passed. The gossip faded. Life, predictably, went on. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of days, something strange began to unfold. Thomas became obsessed with the idea of the gates, a metaphor they joked about, born from the film that had once played in the background of their chaos. In the movie, beyond the gates symbolized confronting one's buried fears. Now Thomas used it as shorthand for his own self-reckoning. He began keeping a journal titled "Gates I Haven't Crossed Yet." In it, he listed every fear, every insecurity, every unresolved memory. Kat read some of it once, secretly, pages filled with raw honesty. Gate 1, admitting when I'm scared. Gate 2, trusting again. Gate 3, forgiving myself. One entry, though, made her chest tighten. Gate 4, letting go of Kat before I destroy her too. She didn't confront him right away. She just watched him, the way he grew quieter around her, the way he smiled but didn't quite reach her eyes. Then, one rainy evening, he told her he was taking a trip alone. "Where?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Back to where we met," he said. "That old cabin near the lake. I just need to reset." Kat nodded, but fear bloomed inside her. "You'll come back, right?" He smiled faintly. "I always do." But when he left, the silence that followed felt final. Days passed without a message. Then a week. Shanice tried to reassure her he's probably journaling in the woods, being poetic, but Kat couldn't shake the dread. Finally, unable to wait any longer, she drove to the cabin. It was almost dusk when she arrived. The lake shimmered dull silver under the fading light. She called his name. No answer. Inside the cabin, she found his bag open, half-packed, and on the table, his journal. The latest entry read, "Gate 5, facing what I've done without hiding behind apologies or laughter. If I can cross this one, maybe the rest won't matter." Then, beneath it, scribbled hastily, "I'm sorry, Kat." For all of it. Panic surged through her. She ran outside, calling his name again and again until her voice broke. The woods swallowed her cries. Then she saw him standing by the dock, soaked from the rain, staring out at the water. "Thomas!" she shouted, running toward him. He turned slowly. His eyes were tired, but calm. "You shouldn't be here. You scared me half to death." "I wasn't trying to." "Then what were you doing?" He looked back at the lake. "Letting go." Kat grabbed his arm. "You don't get to disappear, Thomas." "Not like this." He sighed, his voice low. "You don't understand. I've spent months trying to fix something that might not be fixable. Every time I look at you, I remember everything: the betrayal, the accident, the laughter, the shame." "I love you, Kat," but loving you keeps me trapped at that hospital bed. I can't move past it." Tears blurred her vision. "So what, you're just giving up?" "No," he said softly. "I'm finally being honest." Kat stood there, trembling in the rain, unsure whether to scream or beg. "You once told me the gates were just a metaphor," he said. "Maybe they are, but I think everyone has to walk through theirs alone." She shook her head. "You don't have to." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I need to." And then, as the thunder rolled over the lake, Thomas turned and walked away from the dock, not toward the water, but into the woods, disappearing into the shadows like someone stepping through an invisible threshold. Kat stood frozen, the sound of rain muffling everything except her heartbeat. Hours later, when she finally found him again sitting under a tree, drenched, but alive, something had shifted. His eyes were clearer, steadier. The torment that had clouded him seemed to have lifted. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "You did," she whispered. "I just needed to see if I could face it, the part of me that's been running from everything." "I think I finally did." She didn't know what to say, so she sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. They stayed that way until dawn. When the sun rose, it felt like the end of something, or maybe the beginning. Weeks later, Thomas returned to the city, different. Not completely healed, but grounded. He started volunteering at the hospital that had once humiliated him, teaching patients recovering from injuries how to manage fear and shame. It was poetic, in a way, that the place of his embarrassment became the place of his purpose. Kat visited often, watching him interact with others, gentle, patient, at ease. He was still Thomas Dupree, but somehow lighter. One afternoon, as they walked out of the hospital together, she said, "You crossed the gate, didn't you?" He smiled. "Maybe just the first one." "And the rest?" "Still waiting for me." They laughed softly, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't strained. Shanice later joked that the hospital should name a hallway after him, the Dupree Wing, for accidents and redemption. Thomas laughed, genuinely this time. Kat joined in. But when they were alone, quiet moments still brought flashes of memory: the night of the accident, the laughter, the humiliation. It didn't vanish, it just stopped hurting. Kat once asked, "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" He thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember who I became after it." "Maybe that's what the gates are, not doors we walk through, but walls we learn to stop hiding behind." She nodded, taking his hand. The city moved on. So did they. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but truthfully. And somewhere deep inside both of them, the gates remain, not as threats, but as quiet reminders that every shame, every scar, every laughable mistake could still lead somewhere worth reaching.